Well, good morning. Glad that you are here this morning. Class is a little different because we are in the auditorium instead of in the multi-purpose room back there, but we had some technical issues with the heating system this morning. I thought it might be just a tad bit warmer in here. If I told you that it was warmer in the first 4 or 5 rows, would you look up? I know. Those back row seats are premium. I understand completely. Make sure you get a bulletin, and there is a month's worth, men, of those leading in worship, so you can tell when your turn is coming up. And if you can't, there are some substitutes listed. Tim is going to be a substitute this month, and also he's going to teach this class next week. Is that right? You want to give us a preview, or do you know what you're going to teach?
I do.
Okay. What is it?
It's going to be an encouragement to read through the Bible in a year.
Nice. Very nice. Looking forward to that. I will be visiting my granddaughter in Chicago. Looking forward to that. We are in the study of heaven. Let's talk about heaven. It's all right. We are asking this morning, do you have a soul? Not everybody believes it. Do you have a soul? Ralph Lewis was raised in a Jewish family in South Africa. He always considered himself a skeptic, but he appreciated some of the rituals at his synagogue. He appreciated the beauty. He appreciated some of the things that they did, but he just considered them rituals. He became a psychiatrist in Canada. He joined the faculty of the University of Toronto. His wife had a battle with breast cancer. And even though he sensed some sort of providence, some sort of something going on, he couldn't explain it. But during that period, she began to regain her health, and she improved greatly, and she came through the process in a healthy manner. But they still both became atheists. And after all, it seemed like a natural step in their philosophy of materialism. It means, that there's no spiritual dimension. That's their particular belief system. There's no spiritual dimension to life. There is simply the physical. This is real. And once you die, it's just over. You don't have a soul. You don't endure after you leave this physical life. In fact, I took one sentence from his writing. He said, there is simply no room for belief in a spiritual realm and a scientific view of reality, period. That was just his belief. Nothing exists after this life is over. Now, he concedes that people have an intuitive belief in a soul. He says, yes, most of us believe that. He said it's just wishful thinking. I'm quoting him again. Death has never been popular, especially when it is seen as the final and utter cessation of being. The prospect's tolerability increases only when it is framed as a mere passage to a heavenly paradise filled with all manner of delights. He says humans are profoundly egocentric, and it is natural for us to frame the world in self-referential terms. We cannot easily conceive of the world existing without us, and we struggle to imagine our absolute non-existence. In other words, we just can't take it. So we created the concept of an everlasting, an eternity, and we created the concept of a soul that would go on living because we can't take it, our non-existence. He believes that matter achieved immense complexity through spontaneous, unguided processes of self-organization. In other words, the Big Bang Theory. That's how we all came about. further sculpted in biological organisms by powerful evolutionary forces. Okay, he's an evolutionist. Basically, when you die, your brain dies, you decay, you become worm food. Just over. When you think about that, what comes to your mind? Pardon? Empty. Okay, it's kind of an empty thought, isn't it? Hopeless. Not comforting at all.
As a Christian, it's hard for me to conceive of there not being something there.
Yeah. Because that's at the core of Christianity. So it just comes natural to us. So basically, we are talking about physicalism versus dualism. Physicalism is just all physical. There's no spiritual realm. But we are dualists. What does dual mean?
What, two?
Two. So what are there two of? Physical and spiritual. There is this earthly physical realm, but there is also a spiritual realm. You know, when someone gets sick and they are dying, when circumstances seem dire, when your health fails, you start looking for answers. In fact, somebody said it in last week's class. There are no atheists on their deathbed.
Right.
They all of a sudden start to believe. Well, I don't know if that's true or not. It sounds good to me, but I don't know if it's true. Some of us turn to religion, and we cling to religious doctrine. I want us to ask, are we more than our brain? What does the Bible say? Are we more than our brain? Should we question the Darwinian dogma that the soul is just a figment of our imagination? The scientists like to say, no, it's just physical. Sorry. You're just a brain, nothing more. Sir Colin Blakemore, professor of neuroscience at the University of Oxford, said, the human brain is a machine which alone accounts for all our actions and our most private thoughts. Okay, that's physicalism. There's a physical explanation for everything. Dualism, very different. It's the idea that humans are, yes, we have a physical body, but we also have a very non-physical mind or soul. Yes.
Question is,
Sure.
the question keeps the well,
Okay.
confidence of the legislation. Everyone should do the right thing.
Yeah. Throw up the entire stalk, the wheat falls, the chaff goes away. To use a biblical illustration. One of the things that has impressed me the most, I suppose, if you go back and look at all cultures, as far back as you can possibly go, virtually all of them believe they have a soul. So where did that come from? Creation. Made in His image, He breathed life into us. It wasn't just the physical, was it? Okay? We're all unique, aren't we? We're not the same thing. Philosophers Mark Baker and Stuart Getz wrote a book called The Soul Hypothesis, which is addressing the very topic we're talking about. And they point out that most people, at most times, in most ages, have a belief in the soul. Well, that's pretty. It's kind of like the flood story. Virtually every people, as far back as you can go, no matter what culture, have a flood story. And they may be slightly different, but there is a flood story, a universal or a great flood story. In short, the soul hypothesis seems to be extremely natural. It's just a natural thing to believe, almost inevitable since all cultures have it, that we have a mind and we have a body. And the two are separate. And the mind in Christianity is called the soul. Goes on living once this physical life is over. And there are examples throughout history where people have held beliefs that seemed intuitive and it seemed like it was just natural, but they've been proven false. For example, at one time it was just natural to think if you go out there in the ocean far enough, you're going to fall off the edge.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, that just was a natural thing to believe. But science proved it wrong, right? Or am I wrong? Have you been out there? Have you gone out there in the ocean? Okay, just check. I think some of you are sleeping already. It's dark in here. New discoveries in the field of neuroscience, including progress in mapping the brain, are leading neuroscientists to say there's no soul. We've proven it. Daniel Dennett is very blunt. He says this idea of immaterial souls capable of defying the laws of physics has outlived its credibility, thanks to the advancement of natural sciences. It's been on the cover of magazines in the last few months. Neuroscience has proven, they say, you don't have a soul. That's right. That was on the headlines for a while. God is dead. Well, Baker and Getz, who wrote The Soul Hypothesis, says, reports of the death of the soul have been greatly exaggerated. Not so fast, they say. How can you prove there is no soul? How can the physical prove spiritual? If the soul is the core of you, it's where you think, it's where you where your desires come from. It's where your memories are, your beliefs. In the field of psychology, that's the ego. You study psychology in school? Freudian, id, the ego, the superego. It would be the ego, the I, the self. It interacts with our body, but it's distinct from the body. When you speak of the soul, you're talking about the core of who you are. If you read in the Old Testament, you'll find reference to the soul. If you read the New Testament, you'll find reference to the soul. The Bible is very dualistic. It believes there is a soul. It explicitly affirms the reality of the soul, and it doesn't even attempt to prove it. But if you piece together clues in Scripture, it appears that our soul separates from the body at what? Death. And what happens?
What do you mean?
Yeah, what happens at that point? Say it again. God takes charge. Whatever He wants to happen, that's what happens. There are multiple views of what happens at death. This is not a class on that. We might talk about them, but we're not going to go into any great detail or try to push any one of them. But there are several views of what happens at the point of death. The one thing we do know, and we do all agree on this, That's when the soul separates from the body. The body begins to physically decay, goes back to dust, dust to dust, ashes to ashes, so on and so forth. But the soul is in the hands of God. Now, it isn't, in my opinion, crystal clear, black and white, what happens at that point. But I'm going to take probably what has been the traditional accepted view of most of us. Again, not trying to change your mind if your view is any different. But the soul would enter into a temporary intermediate state of disembodiment until the general resurrection of the body time ends. Okay? And what does the Bible call that time period in the in-between? Paradise. But it also uses some other words. Okay? Paul would use, well, Abraham's bosom is also called, what were you going to say? Hades, the Hadean world. There's still another word that is totally different.
Waiting place?
There's a waiting place. What does Paul use? Specifically, if you've got like King James, American Standard, the older versions, Paul says you are doing what?
Waiting, sleeping.
Sleep. You sleep. Maybe that's where Rip Van Winkle story came from. You know, sleeping for so long. I don't know. But there are various views. In my opinion, again, it isn't crystal clear exactly what happens, but Jesus, you pretty well rely on him, right? Whatever he says and teaches.
Amen.
And he told the story in Luke 16, is it? About Lazarus, the rich man, and Abraham's bosom, and the torment, and this sort of temporary intermediate state until the day of judgment. So the Bible suggests that we have a soul and it has a purpose. Jesus is hanging on the cross between two thieves. One of them rails on him and appears not to come to his senses. The other does, and he has a request. And what is the request?
It's in the message.
That's Lazarus and the rich man. I mean, this is the one of the thieves on the cross.
To take me with you.
Take me with you. When you come into your kingdom, take me with you. What does Jesus say?
You are there.
Today, you will be in paradise with me. So Jesus, not only did he tell this story of this intermediate waiting place that rich man and Lazarus were involved in, but he's also hanging on the cross, about to die physically. And he says to one who is also dying, today you will be with me where?
In heaven.
In paradise. Basically the same thing that he talked about with the story of rich man and Lazarus. That's right. There are some few general things that we can know about for sure. The rest, we'll find out when we get there. I'm in Luke chapter 23, if you want to flip over with me. Luke chapter 23, beginning with verse 39. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do not Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. He said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He said to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. Well, that presupposes that Jesus believes in a soul, in something that will last for all eternity. Now, between his death and his resurrection, where was Jesus?
On earth. On earth.
On earth.
Oh, no, you want to go with God?
He went up to be with God,
Sorry.
went to paradise, the Hadean world. Anybody else? Okay. First Peter 3, which is what Cecil is mentioning. Let's flip over and look at First Peter chapter 3 for a moment. Beginning with verse 18. Some pretty incredible things on earth were happening as Jesus was dying on the cross. You can go back and read in the story, graves were opening up. What was happening with people that had been in the grave for a long time? They were up walking around town, showing themselves to people. Does that teach us anything? Well, I don't know exactly. I just know that what seems to be happening is there is a temporary place that is waiting on final judgment, and when your physical dies, rots, decays, ceases to exist, there is a spiritual that continues on. Now we're in 1 Peter 3, beginning with verse 18. For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey. God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is, a person, were brought safely through water. Of course, he goes on to talk about baptism and conscience and, again, resurrection of Jesus. Well, I'm not probably going to build a solid, hard doctrine on end times through this passage, but what does it tell me? There's life after death. I don't understand the depths of the theology of this passage, but I know I like it because it speaks of second chances. Anybody besides me need a second chance? It speaks of second chances. Someone got a second chance. Someone was disobedient. They got to hear a sermon from Jesus himself. Yes. I think that's probably my particular view. I think there would be some who would disagree, but they have a right to be wrong. I'm just kidding. Second Corinthians chapter 5. This is the Apostle Paul, beginning of verse 6. We're always of good courage. 2 Corinthians 5, beginning with verse 6. We know that when we are at home in the body, we are what? Absent from the Lord. You're away from the Lord. Okay, so if you're at home in the body, you're away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Yes, we are of good courage. We would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. But whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please Him, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. The Apostle Paul suggests if you are absent from the body, where are you?
influence.
On earth. If you're absent from the body,
You're with the Lord.
present with the Lord. There is a dualism. There is a physical that you have that is here on earth, but there is an eternal part of you, your soul, that will exist forever. I think Jesus and Paul both agreed, and actually, they both agreed with the Pharisees. We don't often say that, but we can say it in this case. They agreed with the Pharisees, but who did they disagree with? The Sadducees, because they didn't believe in a resurrection. The soul would depart at death into a disembodied existence until the general bodily resurrection. Jesus taught it, Paul taught it, the Pharisees taught it. That was the general consensus of that day. Going to Matthew chapter 22 now. Beginning with verse 23. Matthew 22, beginning with verse 23. Same day, Sadducees came to him and say there is no resurrection. That's why they're Sadducees. Because they don't believe in a resurrection. They were physicalists, I suppose. They didn't believe in a resurrection. They asked Jesus a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no children, left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third, down to the 7th. After them, all the woman died. In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all met her. Jesus said, You're wrong, because you don't know the Scriptures. You also don't know the power of God. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not God of the dead, but of the living. When the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. Well, again, not going into the theology of this particular text, but it presupposes something. What is it? There's a resurrection. There is a soul. There is a part of you, an essence of you that will keep on living. Acts chapter 23. Okay, Jesus has taught it. Pharisees taught it. Sadducees questioned it. Look at Paul, Acts chapter 23. Beginning with verse 6. Acts 23, beginning with verse 6. Now when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, Brothers, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. It is with respect to the hope and the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial. When he said this, a dissension arose between Pharisees and Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. So on this particular topic, the Pharisees, Jesus, and Paul all agree. One of the few times, I think, but they all agree. And what are they telling us? There is a resurrection. There is an eternity. There is a part of you that will go on living. So is it reasonable to believe that our consciousness, our soul, continues to exist in an afterlife?
Yes.
For us, yes. Or are we simply physical frames When you die, you're just snuffed out into oblivion. Heart stops pumping, your brain waves flatten, you just cease to exist. Which one would you rather?
Be alive.
Patricia Churchley, professor of philosophy at the University of California, San Diego, said, the concept of the soul, though having a long and respectable history, now looks outmuscled and outsmarted by neuroscience. Trying to take it away from us. Our soul.
Not getting it.
Me too. Some people assume science can do more than it really can. Science isn't really designed to prove whether there's a God. It's not capable. Not what it was designed to do. Many scientists are physicalists because they look at simply the physical. Scientific American reported on studies of how brain networks are correlated to different mental states. In fact, the headline cover read, How Brain Networks Create Thought. But there were some scientists that popped up and said, wait, that's not even a scientific statement. That's not what the data even tells us. That's a worldview statement. That's a preferential statement. There's nothing factual about it. Not everything will ultimately lead to or come from the physical. Science could neither prove nor disprove God. It would be similar to a scientist figuring out all the ins and outs and the intricacies of Facebook and then saying, well, this just proves that Mark Zuckerberg ever existed. Same concept. You know, Mark Zuckerberg is right. The creator of Facebook. Science can tell you a lot of things, but it can't tell you anything about the spiritual. Science can tell us a lot of things, but it can't tell you much about philosophy. You still need philosophy. Science can't tell you much about theology. You still need theology. God himself has said, I'm going to show you that I exist in one of two ways. Actually, he said, I'll show you in both ways. One is, how? Romans chapter 1. Just look at nature. You should be able to just look at nature and tell it, and you should be able to tell that I am, that I exist. Just natural revelation of the physical world. And then the second way is special revelation, which is Scripture. You've got these two ways to be able to tell that I exist. Now, science can tell us a whole lot about the natural world. You should be able to just look, say, according to God Himself. You should be able to look at Scripture and say, I can see it in my own life. So you've got the physical and you've got the spiritual. Do me a favor. Someone describe to me how coffee smells.
Likes coffee. Well, it depends on whether you like it or not.
Describe the aroma of coffee. What everybody's telling me is it's really hard. We all say it depends on whether you like it or not.
Mhm.
You haven't answered my question. Describe the aroma of coffee. Plain, it's simple. It's easy. Just tell me how coffee smells.
Not easy.
It's not easy, is it? Say it again. Smells pleasant, unless you don't like it. That's a difficult thing to do. Could you in some way with science nail down how coffee smells?
No.
They can tell you the chemical makeup. According to CSI, they can tell you, what was in a field 3 miles away at the time you smelled the coffee, or some of that crazy stuff. I don't know how much of that is true or not. But you can't really describe the aroma with just the chemical compounds or anything else. But coffee exists. I mean, there's a smell and you smell it. Scientists can measure the activity of the brain, but they can't tell me whether it's going to live forever. You might talk about the physiology of the body. That's not going to tell you whether it lives forever. In fact, we know the body doesn't, but the soul. It's kind of like music. There's the physical, and then there is something more to music. Right? Those of you that are musicians, you probably see music differently than the rest of us. Anybody think about math? Do you think about music? Yeah. The musicians say yes, absolutely. You can't separate it. The music is just math. And the rest of us say, that's boring. I don't want anything to do with that. I just like to listen to it. See, it has a dualistic nature to it. There is a part of it that is very structured. There's a part of it that's just hard to describe, isn't it? It moves me, touches me, it encourages me. Memories come to mind. On and on and on you can go. It causes me to worship. All kinds of things. Well, there's a dualistic nature. And the one aspect you can't really describe. When I get back, I'm going to talk about near-death experiences. You've seen movies, read books, people have gone to heaven and come back. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you were on an operating table and saw a bright light. Maybe you were sleeping and had a dream. I don't know what the case might be. Many have said I saw something. I experienced something. We'll talk about those. I don't know if I have a firm answer, but we'll talk about some things. What's the purpose of this class? Let's talk about heaven and heavenly things. Things we don't normally talk about. Any final thoughts? Next week, again, I'll be gone. Tim's going to fill in, talk about reading the scripture, and again, reading through. Sounds like a great class. I try to do that every year. Okay. Keith will be preaching, Tim will be teaching class.
I mean, talk about going into heaven. It's, no concept of time. It seems like a snap of a finger, like if you pass and then all of a sudden you're in heaven or hell. And then so on earth, when we say, oh, they're in heaven, in their sense, they could be, but in our sense, they're not, in my opinion. And
We think in terms of time.
we think in terms of time, but it's the people that died couple thousand years ago, it's still a snap of a finger.
They're already at Judgment Day.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't know, but is the intent saying they made it to heaven because I know it, or I'm judging them into heaven, or is the intent I want to think that, or
That's a great
Is it-
question.
are they- is the intent I'm skipping the waiting, the paradise, the Hades,
I don't know the answer.
and it's so much to look into.
It is.
I don't have any of those answers. I don't know.
But I have opinions.
Yeah, yeah, really hard.
Buddy, I find a lot of times you're where you can get bogged down.
One quick announcement before we close. What was the Facebook page called? Charlie's Elves? Santa Charlie's Elves. There's a Facebook group that is raising funds for Charlie. I think they're selling T-shirts. You can just make donations, things like that. If you're interested, find that Facebook page.
It's a private group, you can be invited to it,
Okay,
so see somebody, myself or somebody.
some way that can invite. Thank you for coming to class. We're going to take a short break. We'll gather back in